Hello, good day. I pray that all of you are well. Welcome to our podcast at the deep end, Evil number 2, in me and you. Wow. Today we're going to talk about something that's quite difficult. You know, we each see ourselves, we're compelled to see ourselves as good. And when I worked for the prison system, everybody in there was a good person. They just, you know how it is. They didn't see themselves as criminals. So today we're going to talk about one of the most difficult things in all to approach in this journey that is you, that is our journey, that is how do we create the new myth. It's about this aspect of evil within me and you. Wow, it's everywhere. Think about it. The accountant finds a way to funnel funds from a nonprofit charitable account into her own. How many ways? How many ways? Welcome to the deep end. You know, it's an amazing thing. A politician is, totally passionate against gay people, and yet he himself is gay. A woman is leaving a church, and she turns to see her wealthy neighbor slip and land on her derriere in the middle of a puddle, and she cannot stop laughing. I mean, hysterically. Everybody around her is looking at her, and she's hysterical to the mortification of her husband and her son, and later even herself. An educator secretly pillages his children's college savings to fund his gambling addiction. Boy, does that come home to roost when his kids are ready to go to college. Billions are spent by ordinary people on pornography, and much of it watched over the internet by those who are piously decrying against it. In 2018, on Valentine's Day, there were already 21 dead from mass shootings. And that doesn't include all of those with gun-related deaths, which was 1,827, and that's just in America. In 2016 alone, over 1,000 were killed in mass shootings by legally acquired weapons. 131 of those 134 shootings were by white men and across 40 states. Yet, the whole ethos of America seems to be against foreign, non-white people, and they're the ones who are demonized. And now, of course, there's the mentally ill, and yet there are still no laws. You know, we now know what the cost is of having a gun in your belt, having a gun in your closet. We know what the cost is, and I have guns in my closet. And I've had guns in our family for years, and you know what? I'd give them up if I knew it would save one child's life. And yet, I still see something in me that reflects all of the things I've said. It used to be there was an out there, an evil person that we could hold our anger against, this demonized other. But we've slowly come to see that there is no demon other. Hi, Mary Ann, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
So what was it Wonder Woman said at the end of the show after fighting the face of evil?
Oh, do you want the full quote?
Yeah, I want you to lay it on us, because I think in pop culture we're finally hearing back the wisdom of the ages through these commercial operations. I sometimes see our corporations as the Mephistopheles of our time, and that they're really looking to acquire knowledge, and they're giving it back to us, not realizing that it might be their own undoing.
Yeah. Well, what Diana says is, I used to want to save the world, to end war and bring peace to mankind. But then I glimpsed the darkness that lives within their light, and I learned that inside every one of them there will always be both. A choice, something no hero will ever defeat. And now I know that only love can truly save the world. So I stay, I fight, and I give for the world I know can be.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea that darkness is inside, it's not an outside force. Well, it becomes an outside force as we project it outside.
Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about, is the mechanisms that allow us to participate in it and allow it to participate in us. And I'm going to say that today, what we're going to be talking about are ways of seeing and even approaching this evil that dances within us. And we want to give you some language to talk about it. Now, I believe in psychology. Do I believe in all psychology? No. There's good psychology and there's bad psychology, just like there's good spirituality in religion and bad spirituality in religion. But I want you to see the word psychology, and I probably shared this before. The word psyche literally means soul, and ology, cosmology, biology, means the study of the soul. And so we're going to be going to some psychological models. And one that I draw on a lot because it's comprehensive and it's multicultural is from Carl Jung. A lot of us in the 60s, the devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. Well, what is that devil? And the word that Carl Jung used was the shadow. And I want us to get to know the shadow in ourselves. And what the shadow is all the disagreeable parts of ourself. We put them into this unconscious place, this little black bag, and we call it not me. And that's a way of thinking of the shadow. Another thing I want to talk about are the ways that we come into the shadow, because I want us to understand this is the most difficult part, and I will say this over and over, of the journey, facing it in yourself, because all the mechanisms that we have that are literally called as tools keep us from seeing the very thing that we need to see in order to spiritually advance. And it's amazing how this works. However, our awareness and, the sciences have slowly revealed to us the cognitive processes that we use to keep ourselves from seeing ourselves.
There are many of them.
There are many. And, I'm going to reduce them. There are 15, and you can go to psychcentral.com. It's a young buck there who has the site, but he reduces things fairly well. And I want you to understand that what a defense mechanism is an unconscious, again, the word unconscious mechanism, to reduce the anxiety of those unacceptable or uncomfortable stimuli that we don't like.
Well, and we're trying to protect something, and so I think, what is it that we're trying to protect?
Well, and we've talked about the self,
right,
and the soul. We're fragile beings at our core, and we don't want to feel the hurt. And there is a whole thing in our consciousness of pain avoidance, right?
Well, and yeah,
pleasure is really cool.
Well, and recognizing that you may have been a part of something that was very harmful to others.
Yes.
And taking ownership of that, it's better to kind of live in denial of that.
Okay, and you just hit the first mechanism, which is denial. And I'm going to be honest, I'm drawing from a book by James Hollis, who's one of my gurus, if you will. No, not guru, but mentors for sure. And it's from Why Good People Do Bad Things, Understanding Our Darker Selves. He's a classic Jungian. I've had the pleasure of going to Seattle and being in a lecture and conversation with him, which was awesome. He's a what I would call a true human being who's not afraid to face the darker pieces. Now, I want you to understand that we're going to go to the darker places and give you some ways there, but I want us to understand where the show is going to end, and that's that you can't get to the fullness of light without going through the dark. It's the fire swamp, man, in Princess Bride.
Well,
you got to go through the fire swamp.
Well, and part of going through that darkness means you're going to change your behavior.
Yes, exactly. And that's the whole process. Right. And not just change your behavior, but change the way we think. So denial is the first real, I want to go from the most darkest ones, and that's the ones that let the least amount of light in. The defense mechanisms never go away. The shadow never goes away. But I want you to understand, like Ram Dass said, if you do your inner work, if you really do your inner work, all these little pieces of darkness, they end up becoming little schmoes that you can have into tea. Because the honesty that you bring to it allows you to employ the more sophisticated and honest defense mechanisms, which begin to replace the darker ones. And we're going to get there. It's going to take us a couple weeks, a couple podcasts, because of what we're doing with this podcast. And these are the primitive ones. Denial. We see it in America. And I'm going to use America and Trump because he's doing it really out loud, and we can all see it. And it's a great example of what's happened to us as a people. And believe me, it's happened to us as a people. We can no longer point and say it's the Republicans, although they've definitely been the gardeners of the dark. There's no doubt about that. But the fact is, we've all participated in this corporate interest. Even the senators that I love from my state have accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from pharmaceutical companies. They wouldn't have gotten elected if they hadn't, and that's part of the problem. But we need to be honest. We need to start looking at the devices and mechanisms that are unconsciously being employed by this inner agency that's trying to keep us from being overwhelmed with our anxieties.
Well, and we're faced with a world that is corrupt. And so how do you operate within that and affect any change when you basically have to make deals with the devil?
And when you realize that one's own self is corrupt. And that's the piece that's difficult to really own. We want to look at the corporate world as corrupt. We want to look at the government as corrupt. We want to look at the NRA as corrupt, which it is. But we have to first look and see how we are corrupt and the mechanisms we're employing, because we're using those same mechanisms outside of us. And we can see them in our leadership. Denial is the first one. The second one is regression. And I'm not going to go into all of these deeply because there's a lot of them. Another one is acting out. What we're seeing a whole lot with our mass shootings is acting out of unconscious processes that are so overwhelming that there's no way that we can see. All of Hitler's Germany was seen as an acting out. Okay? He was acting out his own insecurities and everything else, and this is a psychological model of which I partially buy into, but it's a lot more evil than even that. But I want us to see how they implicate themselves within our social system. Another is dissociate. I mean, right now I see a lot of people just go, it'll take care of itself. I'm not going to deal with it. They dissociate themselves. Tell that to your grandchildren. I pray you're old enough to hear that. That was very vicious of me. I wonder what mechanism I was employing.
We all have it.
Oh, it's happening all the time. Another one is compartmentalization. My father, he didn't dream. He says, I don't dream. Now, he spent 3 years in the Second World War, many of those on the front lines, and that guy could compartmentalize, man. People talk about post-traumatic syndrome, and a lot of my friends' parents were experiencing those, with alcohol and, abuse of their spouse and all kinds of stuff. My dad didn't have any of that, but he repressed a whole lot of stuff, man. And he compartmentalized. And he was really good at it. He was an engineer and somewhat of a scientist, and I have to say that's a predilection of those, which is quite disheartening, to say the least. And another one of these top 7, or what are called the primitive, is projection. And, we see in others that which we are not able to see in ourselves. And we now see, when Trump gets up there and is basically telling other people fake news, it's projection and denial. Think about what's going on. He's accusing the legitimate news people of being fake as he creates fake news himself and a false narrative, if you will. A parallel universe. I'm intrigued that parallel means two lines that will never intersect. I don't think wherever that dude is, I don't think it's ever going to intersect with my world, which is disheartening, very disheartening. So those are the top 7, and they're important. Then you get into what's called reaction formation. Right now, America, the whole NRA thing, the whole patriotism thing, the whole you can't kneel at the national anthem as protest, this whole turning America into dogma, it's a reaction formation to the progressive movements that have happened over the last 2 decades. Or I should say 50 years. That's civil rights, that's gay rights, that's women's rights, that's anybody's rights that aren't your white person's rights, which comes down to. So we're experiencing huge reaction formation. Are you seeing what's happening here? Each of these mechanisms is a little eddy, a little pool of darkness that keeps ourselves distracted from seeing something. Okay, from seeing the world as it really is. It reduces our anxiety in the moment, but the consequences of our denial end up compounding themselves in other ways that are unconscious, that keeps building and building until finally you're a mass shooter, or you're a fanatic of some sort, a gun rights fanatic, a religious fanatic.
And collectively, we're living in this world of all this chaos.
And of all these eddies and pools that are gathering. And my friends, they are gathering. They are gathering themselves as we speak. And another aspect of this is repression. Okay? Watching Trump try to squash the First Amendment is repression to the point of oppression. It's amazing how that works. Another one is displacement. We create a straw man or a straw issue. And Trump is great at that, and so is McConnell and the GOP. They've created all these straw men that we go after. Meanwhile, they're completely changing the courts out because they haven't okayed a single judge from the Obama era. Now, I might be wrong. They might have okayed 1 or 2, but they've put off literally, I think, hundreds of these judgeships that they're now filling with people. As we found out that Trump, they don't even know the simplest law terms. I'm serious, man. These are pieces where evil is backing up and happen. And I want you to see that it's happening in you. It's happening in you. These are what we do. These are hard to face.
And they're going to have long-term effects.
That's right. And when we create an other to project these onto, we're just projecting our own stuff. And another one, and this is the one I love because I use it a lot. The next 2 are intellectualization and rationalization. As an academic type, and I'm not an academic, but I'm kind of lean towards data and I love studying stuff, I can intellectualize something to death. I can make it totally non-emotional. I can rise above everything.
Yeah.
I call them, people who live in intellectualization. My brother was one of those, God rest his soul. I love this guy. But he lived on Mount Olympus. He was always looking down and seeing what was wrong with humanity from his great height and never realizing that it was a quagmire and he was stuck in the same crap he was talking about.
And it was just the facts.
It's driving me crazy. I don't want to be stuck in this darkness, which is cool. But what I want you to see as I'm listing these, what we're doing really is getting a bead on them becoming more sophisticated and more awake. Because even through intellectualization, you can start seeing yourself doing this. It's hard to do that when you're in denial or aggression or acting out or dissociating or any of those. You're literally cutting yourself off. But in these, you're getting a little piece of something. And the other is undoing. We just try to undo stuff. Okay? Now, the last 3 that I want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about too much. I'm just going to name them. But they're what I call the Rumpelstiltskin mechanisms. This is when the little pieces of darkness can become schmoes because you've been honest enough now that you can take the dark and you can sublimate it. you can turn it into something else. As Rumpelstiltskin was turning dross into gold, that's what we're doing. We can do compensation, and we can do assertiveness. We can actually take the initiative and actually apologize to somebody. We can take responsibility for our acts, and we can begin to see how our own shadow being is working itself out. But it's very difficult. So I've just given you a whole lot of ways to approach and see. And again, you can go to psychcentral.com and check some of this stuff out. It's pretty cool. I want to go one other place, which I think is very, very relevant for us, and that's a myth that's been around, a story for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's the story of Faust. We know it from the German version written by Goethe. I thought it was Goethe for long, but it's Goethe, and it's about this time. You see, for the church has held this vision of evil all over the place, and we talked about the different traditions and how they see it. But the devil is this guy who's red and with a tail and horns. And what we get with the story of Faust, and Faust was a man who wanted knowledge. He just wanted knowledge. His search was sincere. So he creates this ritual and calls up this devil called Mephistopheles, who was very sharp. And he basically makes a deal. He'll give him all the knowledge he wants, but it's going to cost him his soul. And I want us to see that there is no longer somebody in a red suit. That what we have now is, like Wonder Woman said, it's all about us. It's so much easier to demonize our neighbor than to see the darkness within ourselves. It's so much easier to see an other. And that's really what we're afraid of, the radical other. And the other is the mysterious part of our being that we have a difficulty approaching.
Right, when you think, the devil lives, but the devil's just in your head. Well, that's a scary place for the devil to be.
And the devil is not this inherently bad being. The devil is a slippery, shifting darkness that seduces us,
silver-tongued,
with our comfort and our convenience, right. with the whole concept of what can I say? I'm working on a tune called "The Beast," and it's our comfort and convenience are the tools of my trade. The more that you deny me, the more that I will grow. I can't even remember my own lyrics, but this whole concept of using our comfort and convenience, using our justification. I talked about the church as most people want comfort and justification. Think about the defense mechanism the church is using to keep you from being anxious about wearing a shirt made by young boys who are getting 22 cents an hour.
Right.
And I mean, that's
as we're busting the unions in our own country.
As we're busting the unions in our own country.
Right.
It takes $31, almost $32 an hour to afford, to afford your housing and to be able to create a life. Now, how many of you out there are making $32 an hour or more? This is an amazing situation we've gotten into. And if we don't begin to learn to face the places within us, we'll never be able to face them without us and see how complicated and sophisticated they are. And I want us to see that this shadow being, and we're walking around in it as well as it's walking around in us, it's a house of mirrors. Learning to see into our own mechanisms is basically identifying with the agency of your own being. And we've talked about, go back to the podcast on soul and self. What is this agency? Whoa. Does it even exist? Is it singular? Is it plural?
And it's difficult to see sometimes. And we have so much justification. I mean, even in people who embrace the the higher consciousness community of, our thoughts create our world. And so they're manifesting.
Yes.
And, the whole idea of manifesting your dreams. And there's a slippery slope there, too, because
Yes.
when you start to use your power for yourself versus for the whole, then that can be pretty ugly.
And it's scary as the hell. It really is. I mean, I'll be honest. When especially early in my journey, just about every attempt I made to see into my shadow, to really do this, just led me to the next pool of darkness. I'd try to get over my acting out and say, okay, I'm not really angry at my parents, or I'm angry at my parents because I got wounded because of this, and boy, is that bull crap, da-da-da-da, and you pull on the threads and you follow them down, and pretty soon you're chasing your ass in a little intellectualization thing, and you're no longer even participating in the feeling, the thing that gave rise to it, and that's what you're trying to chase. And you got to chase these things down. Some of them you can't chase them all down because every moment you're generating a bunch more.
It's called life, right?
That's right. But they factor into themselves, if you will. They factor into bigger lumps of being. And we all know what our buttons are, especially by the time you're 30 or 40, you're starting to get a sense of what the buttons are that people push that make you angry.
We hope.
We hope. And some people don't get any further than that. The best they can do is say, you're pissing me off, shut up. And their spouse shuts up. And the spouse shuts up. And the spouse shuts up. And the spouse shuts up. And pretty soon the spouse is having an affair somewhere else. And pretty soon, you see what happens? Honesty, truth. There is a trinity of being, and it's simply truth, love, justice. It has to happen that way. It has to happen that way. And we've been talking about that for many, many podcasts now. So, Marianne, this whole house of mirrors, it's huge. And yet, as I've said, you can't get to the fullness of light without going through the dark. It really sucks.
It does.
Think of all the years
grab a flashlight.
Yeah. Well, and this is the part that we're going to... And think of all the years that Buddha searched where he wasn't seeing. Okay? What was he facing in each of the nooks and crannies that he was going to? And he tried everything from extreme asceticism to everything before he found the middle way, which finally, after a while, led him there. And that was, it's not about extremes.
Right.
It's about finding what the real needs are and satisfying those, not too tightly, not too loosely. And, chopping wood and carrying water. And also addressing the little pools of darkness that come to us. So, again, any final comments, Marianne? We're gonna definitely move into something that I think is really important for all of us. And I hope you'll take this ride with us, because next week we're going to the turning. We're going to go to that place where we see that the darkness is luminous. That yes, it's very, very painful, but that it's on fire. That it carries within itself this presence that is so great, that is so powerful, that many of us will die, or in our death finally see it. As Joseph Campbell said, the shadow is the landfill of the self, yet it is also a sort of vault. It holds great unrealized potentialities within you. What have you kept in the black bag of yourself? What if the things that you've been using your repression, your denial to keep down? How many gay people have come out of the closet? Bless them. They've given us an example of coming out from under the darkness of all these pieces. The self-hate, the self-destruction of acting out, which is what America's going through. What is this turning? This term that within my tradition was metanoia. the great turning towards the light. We hope you've enjoyed evil, and we offer you God's peace from the deep end.